everyone. We're getting pretty close to start time. I just wanted to check in if you haven't had a chance to drop in the chat where you're from and what your favorite summer treat is. Go ahead and take an opportunity to do that. And we will be on in just a few minutes to start the presentation on disability and gender-based violence. All right, everyone, it is just about that time. For anybody who has just joined us, if you wouldn't mind putting where you're from in the chat and letting us know what your favorite summer treat is, and then we'll go ahead and get started on the discussion regarding disability and gender-based violence. So on that note, my name is Sashella Darling, and I am very, very grateful to be here today to talk to you all about some of the disparities that disabled folks experience when it comes to gender-based violence. And I just want to preface this with I am a self-advocate. I am a person living with a disability, and I think self-advocacy is very, very important, and I think these topics should be addressed. There's a whole community of disabled folks out there who unfortunately kind of get left out of the conversation too frequently. So I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to uplift the voices of these individuals. So on that note, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for choosing this breakout session. So again, disability and gender-based violence, a closer look. My name is Sashella Darling. I use she, her pronouns, and I am all about disability justice. So I'm a student here at the University of Louisville, and I will actually be graduating this semester with my degree in disability studies and advocacy. So a little bit about me, I work in partnership with the Kentucky Partners in Policy. Sorry about that. It looks like I was having some technical difficulties there for a second. Anywho, okay, so I would love to talk to you a little bit more about KPIP. So, Kentucky Partners in Policy is a program that I'm affiliated with that's in partnership with the Commonwealth Council on Developmental Disabilities. So, I go to Frankfurt and I advocate for policy changes and legislative changes that are mindful and inclusive of the disabled community. I am also an ambassador through the Office for Women, and again, just disability justice is my jam. It's the thing that I do as a self advocate. This is something that is part of my life, and you know, we do what we love and then it doesn't feel like work, right? I love talking about disability justice. I love talking about a lot of the principles of disability justice, and you'll see that I have the 10 tenets or 10 principles of disability justice listed here on this first page. The first is intersectionality. Everything that I do, I strive to do it from an intersectional perspective. Leadership of the most impacted. We want to make sure that we are serving those who are on the farthest of the margins and giving them opportunities to lead. Anti-capitalist politics, going into sustainability, we want to make sure that we have this world and we take care of it. And the commitment to cross-movement organizing. Today we'll talk a little bit about reproductive justice and how disability intersects at gender-based violence. Recognizing wholeness, because we are whole regardless of ability status. Again, leaning into sustainability. We're here, we've been here, we will be here. Disability is part of the human experience and we should try to run from it. Commitment to cross disability solidarity. Disability comes in all shapes, all sizes. Every racial group, ethnic group, age, it doesn't matter. We are here, we exist, and we need to come together. Interdependence, I am here to remind us all, as well as the disabled community, that we are interconnected and we shouldn't try to run from that. We should lean into community. Collective access. It is extremely important that we all have access. We know that that's a huge barrier for many individuals with disabilities. So working towards that collective access is huge. And then to top it off, the very last and 10th principle of disability justice is collective liberation. So today in this presentation, I lean into these principles to try and honor our history and seek justice for disability. On that note, today we're going to be talking about a very critical issue, sexual violence against individuals with disabilities. So we're going to go ahead and approach this discussion with empathy and a commitment to centering the voices and experience of the disabled individuals. So through the lens of disability justice, we're going to explore some of these barriers and some equitable solutions. So thank you again so much for joining me in this discussion. Now, since we are talking about sexual violence, gender-based violence, trigger warning, please take care of yourself if you need to step away if the content gets hard, and it does. Some of the statistics that we'll be addressing today are alarming. Please, please, please consume this content at your pace and take care of yourself. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and start off with this video. So again, trigger warning. And it looks like, is that video showing up for y'all? I don't think it is. I'm gonna have to. Is it?
It's there. Yeah.
It's there. Okay.
It's not playing.
It's not playing. Okay. Okay. There we go. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm gonna try sharing this a different way because it's not. We're gonna go like this. I'm just gonna share my screen because I can't figure out how to get it to work within the presentation. So bear with me. Can you all see that now?
Yep.
Okay, hopefully this works better. Okay, I think that's gonna work.
Will you turn your volume up? So
Okay, thank you so much for your patience while we experienced some technical difficulties. Let me get back to my presentation really quick. Okay. So again, thank you. I know that can be difficult to hear the stories of the survivors of domestic violence, of gender-based violence. Um, but it is something that we need to be talking about, which is why we're here today. Um, so I want to just start this off by talking about some facts and engaging in some dialogue with you. Um, oh, I'm sorry. Did you guys not get to hear? I'm just now seeing the chat. Were you able to hear the video?
It was it wasn't very loud, but
It wasn't very
I
loud.
read the closed captions, so it
Okay,
was
I'm sorry.
yeah. No,
Tech.
that's
Okay, well, next time we'll figure it out so it's a little easier for y'all to hear next time. So the first fact that I want to share with you all is that individuals with disabilities experience a higher lifetime prevalence of abuse compared to those without disabilities. And I just want to throw out a question for you all. Why do you think that might be? You can raise your hand and I will call on you, or if you want to drop something in the chat, you can do that. So, again, why do we think individuals with disabilities experience a higher lifetime prevalence of abuse compared to those without? Polly, yes, go ahead.
so. I think that part of the reason that this happens is because abusers could manipulate and indoctrinate uh, people with disabilities into thinking that they can't live their life without them, and that they have to have them around in order to function. And so then, people with disabilities are like, oh, well, maybe that's right. Maybe I can't live without you. And so I can just put up with this in order to be able to live and function.
Yes, thank you. And that's very true. Isolation is a tactic that is used to control individuals with disabilities. In the chat, I see Bree said easier at times to isolate and silence. Absolutely. Destiny said, like in the video, I feel like they end up relying on the people around them. And so they feel as though they can't live without them, and that's very, very true experience for many disabled individuals. Bree also said, depending on the disability, may not have access to even tell anyone, and that is so true, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. I see somebody else is typing, so we'll go ahead and wait for them. If there's anybody else who would like to say anything, please feel free to raise your hand. Mac said, I mean, especially if you get married and are on SSDI, you can't really leave because you can't have much savings at all. Many less stuff put away to escape. It sounds like, Mac, you know a little bit about the financial structures that capture disabled folks. So thank you. Polly, your hand is still raised. Did you have another comment? Okay. All
No.
right. Okay. So we talked a lot about the vulnerabilities. So there can be physical limitations, communication barriers, the dependence on the caregivers, and also societal attitudes. So we quite literally, environments are created within the home and living settings for individual with disabilities. And mind you, this could be in institutional settings, right? Not necessarily in the home, but these power dynamics are put in play, which often contribute to the loss of autonomy to that individual with disabilities. So, y'all did great. Thank you so much for your feedback and your comments. Fact number two, people with disabilities are subjected to violent crimes at a rate 4 times as high as individuals with without disabilities. So again, going back to the some of the comments that were talked about, individuals with disabilities are isolated. They might be manipulated to think that they are dependent on a person, and all of those factors contribute to the prevalence of gender-based violence. So, targeted exploitation. Perpetrators of violent crimes may specifically target individuals with disabilities, specifically because they are perceived to be vulnerable. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is entirely vulnerable, but when they are perceived to be so, the increased risk is associated. Also, impunity. If an individual, if a perpetrator who commits these violent acts against disabled folks, they often do so in, oh, I'm not going to get punished. Like, nothing's going to happen to me because, who would even believe this disabled person, anyways? I'm in a position of power, and people are going to believe me, an able bodied person, over a disabled person. So, oftentimes, we see that they act with impunity. They think that they can get away with it because the voices of the individuals that they are abusing um, don't necessarily bear a lot of weight within the system. All right. Fact number 3: women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to experience sexual assault compared to individuals without disabilities. So when I learned this fact, I was I was not at all surprised. I am a survivor of gender-based violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault, and I will never forget that experience, the many experiences that I've had to endure in my life. And so when I started advocating and speaking up about disability justice and gender-based violence, I was kind of heartbroken to see that we see that there's this disparity between, women and gender nonconforming folks, trans and non-binary individuals who are violated more, and we don't have the research, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough information as to why these things are specifically happening and what we can do. So I think it's important to talk about it when you think about gender-based violence as a category, and to zone in on the most vulnerable. I think we need to come up with some really good strategies to mitigate these acts of violence. So, power dynamics. That is a huge role that plays in gender-based violence within the realm of disability. We talked a little bit about how individuals in a caregiving position might exploit an individual that they are caring for. But I would like to open it up for discussion on what you might think gender-based violence might look like in an institutional setting. So again, if you want to raise your hand or if you want to drop a comment. So we're thinking about how in institutional settings, so this could be in an independent living center, in a hospital, or some sort of rehabilitative center, think, prison, jail systems, disabled people get locked up too. So in those institutional settings, what might the power dynamic look like that gives, that takes away power and autonomy from individuals with disabilities? And if you want to make any comments, please make sure that you raise your hand. I see that some people are typing in the chat. Yes, Polly.
I think the biggest, like, the key word in this is power. I think that people with disabilities are seen as powerless, And so, in settings like institutional settings or with social dynamics, uh, there is this power trip of being able to control people with disabilities. Um, and with gender violence, I think it's just with especially physical disabilities. Uh, it is a seen thing that's like, okay, well, they're like actually physically less powerful than I am, and so I can equate that to being less powerful in general. When in general, like when in reality, disabilities are human beings, have lived experiences and feelings just like everyone else, and so that when people don't like equate, human beings to being a human being, then take advantage of that.
I definitely think you highlighted the right word, power. It is, power can be very intoxicating, especially when it is um, can consume somebody. And when people take advantage of another person for some reason, they perceive that to be a form of power, and it can be and it can be very harmful. Destiny said, I think ableism has a lot to do with it. If a medical professional does not believe that a person with disabilities can do certain things, they may be denied medicine. They may need such as birth control, antidepressants, etc. I so appreciate that you brought up the term ableism. So ableism is this belief that if you are able-bodied, you can do things within the I guess, normal functioning of the human body, right? That somehow you are better. You are inherently a acceptable body, which is a really harmful and false ideology that we know is just plain downright false. But that doesn't mean that the system isn't there and that system it does impact our lives. So in the medical settings, yes, it can look like you're. I was taught that disabled people are asexual and just don't have sex. Well, that's not true. That's very disempowering. Individuals with disabilities and a whole myriad of disabilities engage in sexual pleasure in a variety of ways. So to label somebody as incapable, again, it takes away their personal autonomy and their personal power. So this can, oh, and then also social dynamics. So as a society, and I think that ableism really ties into that social dynamics. When we perceive people to be incapable of doing acts or that it's inappropriate for them to do acts because we've said no, we don't want you to reproduce. There's a whole history of eugenics that I did want to talk about, but not in depth, but in disability history, we learn about the eugenics movement and forced sterilization. When a community says we don't want people who look like you, act like you, think like you within our community, we're going to prevent you from reproducing, from having those reproductive rights. And that has had a direct impact on the disabled community. In fact, there's a lot of forced sterilization that still occurs to this day. We often like to think that it's violence of the past. It is not. It is very much thriving to this day. So we've got another chat. So Max said the doctor or whoever has a lot of power over the disabled person they're supposedly caring for. I mean, there's the way the doctors don't listen to women and GSM in general. And deny medical care or refuse needs, refusing to diagnose or giving a mental health diagnosis instead of contemporary versions of hysteria diagnosis. I really appreciate that you brought up hysteria because that has a long-standing history in disability justice. But also there's even things like you need to do this or I'll put you as non-compliant in the records or even they won't believe that I did this to you. I'm the doctor. Thank you so much, Mac, for including that comment. I think there is a lot of power dynamics that we don't, I think, inherently think about when it comes to vulnerable people, such as disabled individuals. So, this abuse can include caregivers, healthcare professionals, family members, and virtually anybody who's in a position of authority over that individual. So, moving on, we're going to go to fact number 4. Just 3% of sexual abuses involving people with developmental disabilities are even reported. So again, I want to turn this to you. Why? Why is only 3% of sexual abuses involving developmental disabilities are being reported? What are some of those barriers you think? Okay, Talaya, I hope I said your name right. Believability. And that is huge, huge, huge. Unfortunately, in the realm of disability, there it is quite a common experience that they're not believed. Why would anybody want to rape a disabled person? Right? That's kind of the question that authority figures in positions of power who are receiving these reports often think, well, who would want to do that to you? And so there is that fear of, well, nobody's going to believe me. So what's what's the point, right? Why would I report it when nothing is going to come of it? Lack of access is huge. There are not always accessible ways to report abuse if you are deaf or hard of hearing. And the region that you live in doesn't have the capacity for you to text your local emergency provider or doesn't have an interpreter on call. If you're blind and you need access to Braille in order to fill out forms, these are all going to be barriers that will prevent individuals with disabilities from actually reporting their abuse. And I really appreciate this fear of retribution because that is huge as well. Um, Nobody wants to get caught up in the system and have adverse impacts from reporting. Sometimes that happens though, and also retaliation. So if an individual is reported but doesn't necessarily get held accountable, then there's that what happens when they're back out in the populace and they have access to this disabled individual, right? And then of course trust in the system. um, if the system has failed you, which it often does for disabled individuals, then if the abuse continually happens, um, you don't trust that it's going to help you and support you in getting out of that situation. Communication access is huge. If I can't tell you, if I'm autistic and I don't have the capacity to speak to you, I still should have the ability to report. And we got to come up with these systems that make it easier to communicate and report these. And then the last comment that we have is sometimes they don't understand their own rights or don't think anybody can help them. A huge, huge, huge one, unfortunately, and especially with developmental disabilities, um, we don't always know our rights. We don't always know how those really truly impact ourselves, impact our lives. And so, if there is a lack of understanding on your rights, on your bodily autonomy, on what should and shouldn't be allowed to your body, and if you don't feel empowered to speak up about that, then yes, it can definitely perpetuate the abuse. So, we talked a lot about those barriers to reporting. People with disabilities may encounter various barriers, such as the communication, the fear of skepticism, concerns about retaliation, further victimization, and then, of course, the lack of accessible reporting mechanisms. So, y'all did great. We're going to go on to fact number 4. 83% of women with disabilities will be sexually assaulted in their lives. And that is an unfortunate truth. 83, that's a pretty large number of women with disabilities that is being impacted. And I dare say that that is something that we must change for equity, right? And for justice, disability justice. So the complex intersections, and I do use the term women in here, and that's just because there is not a lot of research around trans and non-binary individuals' experiences who intersect at disability, and data on the violence that is occurring in their population, in their community. So we do need to be mindful of the intersecting identities. Black and brown women, indigenous women, they experience rates of sexual violence when they meet at the intersections of disability even more. So we need to be mindful that disability crosses every race, every ethnic group, every age, every gender. Disability does not care what your body looks like. If you become disabled, you become disabled, whether it be temporarily or indefinitely. So we need to be mindful of those intersecting identities, but also how those compounding identities influence gender-based violence. So that marginalization we need to be mindful of, and those compounding vulnerabilities. All right, it looks like that was the last fact that I had for you. So here is a question that I want to open up to the floor. How does domestic violence manifest for individuals with disabilities? So what is it that they're experiencing? And again, if you want to raise your hand or if you want to drop something in the chat, please feel free to do so. Okay. All right. So we have restriction of medicines or mobility aids. Yeah, absolutely. It can also look like financial control. It can look like um, isolation and segregation from the community. I think we talked a little bit about um, how individuals who have caregivers that are also their abusers will manipulate them to thinking that they aren't worthy, that it's their fault. Leaning back onto that video that we started off this breakout session in, um, it looks very gradual, right? It can look like physical violence. It can look like um, being thrown around. It can look like rape. It can look very, very painful. It can be unwanted sexual contact, threats. Um, it can be verbal and psychological abuse. The who would ever love you? I know that that was something that, in my own personal experience when I was married, it was a lot of emotional manipulation. It was what would you do without me? And when you are vulnerable and you are dependent on somebody to provide care for you, um, that puts you in a pretty difficult position. It can look like neglect. It can look like withholding medications, like Talea said, isolating individuals, physically harming service animals. If you have an emotional support animal or a service animal, it could look like neglecting your caregiver, neglecting that, your partner neglecting that aspect. Um, it could be depriving victims of, or I should use different terminology, survivors of necessary physical accommodations. And again, like Talia said, withholding or destroying assistive devices such as wheelchairs, or if you are hearing impaired, it could be taking away your cochlear, the device that goes on the outside of your cochlear implant, or taking away your hearing aids. If you have a cognitive disability, it could look different than all of that. So, uh, and then again, the financial abuse aspect, especially if you're, say, an individual with a disability who's receiving SSI or SSDI, right? I mean, you have some sort of financial resource, but not having any access to it, not being able to utilize it in the way that you see is best for you. So it can come in a lot of different forms. All right, another question for you all. And we're going to spend the last portion of this breakout session talking about this. So, how can society effectively address domestic violence and sexual assault experienced by individuals with disabilities? So, what are things that we can do as a community to better address and provide services for these survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault? If you want to just brainstorm for a few minutes and think about what effective strategies that we can implement. And I see a couple of people writing in the chat. Again, if you want to, oh, I was going to say raise your hands. Go ahead, Polly.
I know we talked about this at your discussion, but when creating policies about disabled people and people who have these disabilities, be sure to include them in the conversation and understand what their needs are, because by creating policies without about people without their input, you are basically just causing a problem. You're making it worse. And architecture, and talked about that too, the accessibility to restrooms and doors, how heavy they are, and elevators, and when creating buildings on campus, even at the University of Louisville, just ensuring that you're being aware and taking into consideration everyone's needs.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate that you bring it and right back home here to the University of Louisville, creating safe spaces. Absolutely. I know that we have issues here at the University of Louisville with car break-ins at night. It can be I think just anybody could feel a little bit unsafe walking around at night, right? If you're an individual with a disability, here on campus at night. Supposedly, you're supposed to be able to call a campus hotline to get transportation in the event of, oh, I just am feeling unsafe. I would like an escort. Here at the University of Louisville, we have a system like that. Unfortunately, the vehicles aren't accessible. So if we have a system in place that's supposed to reduce harm and increase safety, but individuals with disabilities can't engage in that system, then we aren't protected, right? It doesn't serve us if it's not accessible. So I really appreciate that you bring that up, Polly. It looks like Regina said, elevate the stories and proactively include those voices in services. And this is kind of leaning into what Polly had just said as well. Nothing about us without us. If we're going to be creating policies, then we need to be creating policies that are mindful of our experiences. And if we're not in the room to help create those policies, then at best we're guessing, right? We're saying, oh, we think this is what would benefit this population. And that sometimes misses the mark. Or a system is set up with one intention and then develops into another system, much like sheltered workshops. So it looks like Destiny has said advocate for people with disabilities and start taking their accusations seriously. I think recognizing the intersectionality of it all would help too. If 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted or raped, then those women with disabilities are also included in the statistics. Yep. I think telling people about what's going on, for me, doing things like this, where as a self advocate, I get to educate the community and bring awareness to these disparities and these really harmful and impactful issues, then we really are grounded and we get to really work towards creating those systems. Polly, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, again, I wanted to reiterate like the lack of representation in media, in the legislature, um, just in general. The lack of representation is what causes these issues. It's what causes the disparities in marginalized communities as a whole, intersectional. So
Absolutely.
we need more representation in all of these areas. So
And I think that is very, very true. Um, the representation that we've seen in media when it comes to individuals with disabilities, it tends to be the super crip narrative that, oh, there's this amazing disabled person who's doing these just cool things, which are actually like tend to be just kind of mundane, like ordinary tasks that anybody does, but because that individual is disabled, they're labeled as exceptional. And that can be very it disconnects us from reality, right? Because everybody who lives in a disabled body is doing so differently. It looks different, it feels different, and if we aren't representing that in a very accurate way, then we're not addressing the issue as we should. So I wanted to share this next slide with you. So systemic change involves education and awareness. I think we kind of addressed that. Promoting education and awareness campaigns that highlights intersectionality of disability and violence, challenges stereotypes, and raises public consciousness about the unique vulnerabilities faced by individuals with disabilities. So doing things like today, doing these breakout sessions and conferences talking about these issues are just one of the best places that we could start. Um, Again, accessibility and inclusivity, ensuring that there are support services, including shelters, hotlines, counseling, all of them. It all needs to be accessible. It all needs to be inclusive. It needs to be available for us to engage with, because if we can't engage with the system, then this violence is perpetuated. Trainings for professionals. So providing specialized training for professionals working with individuals with disabilities, including law enforcement, healthcare providers, social workers, and legal advocates to recognize and respond effectively to signs of abuse and trauma. It's super important that those individuals who are working directly with this populace know how to do so appropriately. All right, we got a comment. Hold on. Educators, yes, absolutely. We need to be educating, training, teaching, and sharing our stories. Which leads into four, empowerment and self advocacy. Empowering individuals with disabilities to assert their rights, access support services, and advocate for themselves. So, this may involve providing resources, information, and supports to help individuals navigate systems and assert their autonomy. Um, that everybody should learn to be a self advocate. This is not exclusive to disability. We should all feel empowered to rise up and use our voices. We know that individuals with disabilities are not given opportunities to self advocate. They're not given leadership opportunities at the same rates as non-disabled individuals. We're very much labeled as they have limited capacity, so just let's not bother them. And I'm here to kind of break those stereotypes to say, we can be self advocates, we can feel empowered, and in doing so, we can make changes. All right, so again, continuing on, systemic change involves legal protections. And I know Polly was talking about this policy, policy, policy. When it all boils down to it, it boils down to policy, right? Because there's people in positions of power who are writing policies. And if they don't have the perspective to write an inclusive policy, chances are they might end up writing a policy that does more harm than good, that creates more barriers as opposed to creating access. So, strengthening legal protections for individuals with disabilities who experience domestic violence or sexual assault. This includes enacting and enforcing laws, right? If somebody reports, then we need to do something about it. We can't just say, oh, yeah, right, that could have never happened to them. If we have the reporting mechanisms in place to facilitate that reporting, but then disbelieve, we have to have those enforcement mechanisms for the safety of us all. Collaborative principles. Uh, so one of the biggest things is interdependence, right? At the very beginning, we talked about the disability principles, the 10 disability principles, and interdependence is very much one of them, and collaborating with other organizations and other social movements. It is imperative that when we talk about reproductive justice, we're also talking about disability justice. When we're talking about racial justice, that we're talking about disability justice. When we're talking about gender equity, that we're also talking about disability justice. So let's be mindful and take a collaborative approach, because the more we come together, the more change we can actually elicit. Systemic change also involves addressing systemic inequalities. So looking at the system, actually taking an ableist lens and scrutinizing the systems through that ableist lens, and how was this written to be exclusive of these bodies, and how can these systems be rewritten to be inclusive of these bodies, to be mindful of the different body minds, because we all come in body minds and they all come in different shapes and sizes and different abilities. So we need to address those systemic inequalities. And then the very last, of course, is that intersectional approach, that we are recognizing that disability isn't, when you're disabled, you're not only disabled, right? I'm disabled, but that doesn't define my entirety, right? I'm also a mom. I'm also a student. There's so much more to me. And when we recognize and acknowledge that every disabled individual meets at multiple intersecting identities, then we can have a more nuanced understanding of disability and why it is so important that we lean into disability justice and this work. So, and I think we are getting close to the end of this. Let me just check really quick. Okay, so we've got just about 15 more minutes left. So I did want to open up the floor for discussions. I would like to know what things surprised you in this presentation today. What was your takeaway? What fact stood out to you the most? And I would also like to throw out what you might do from this point forward, having this knowledge and information to provide and push for gender equity and within the realm of disability justice. So the floor is now open to you all. If you would like to make a comment, raise your hand or feel free to drop something in the chat. And then here's some resources too as well. I'll go ahead and leave those up for y'all. Yeah, Polly.
So you know I love talking. Here I
Mm-hmm.
am again. But I always appreciate the things that I learn from you. I genuinely, it's sad to say that I didn't know the statistics of domestic violence within the disabled community. It's heartbreaking because it's not just it's like an international issue. It's everyone. We have so many people who are facing these disparities that are not getting the representation that they need. And I think my biggest takeaway is, and I know I talked about this with you a little bit, but my mom is running for the House of Representatives. And so is getting her into office and then bringing these resources through me to her and having her speak to people like you to ensure that the policies that are coming into play for Kentucky start becoming more intentional and inclusive. And I really appreciate what my mom's doing. She's doing it she says she's doing it for my generation. So just to go forth in life understanding that my experiences are valid, but that I have to be intentional about understanding other people's experiences and sharing that with people who are in positions of power so that they can make a change.
Thank you. And I just love that you keep reminding us that your mom is running for that and the reasons why she's doing it, and you're supporting her and also facilitating some of this education and making sure that she gets this information. Because truly, in my work with the Kentucky Partners in Policy, I have for me, everything leads back to policy. And that can be a huge discussion in and of itself when we create policies that, again, like we're like, oh yeah, this would be so great. Like we see with sheltered workshops. If you're familiar with sheltered workshops, those are basically like the places where individuals with disabilities go when they need a place, right? Whether it be they don't have family to care for them, or their families work, and so they need a place for them to go during the day. And it was established with very great intentions. What it has turned into is the exploitation of individuals with disabilities and exploiting their labor, only getting paid 20 cents an hour. So we can create systems with the absolute best intentions, but if we aren't talking to the people who the system is supposed to support, then we are doing them a disservice. So it's great to know that there are people out there who are advocating for change and who are at the Capitol talking with these individuals. Okay, so Regina says, in addition to articles provided, what educational opportunities are available to healthcare providers to better understand this population group? That's a wonderful question. So, in my personal experience as an individual navigating the healthcare system, there is unfortunately just a lack of perspective. Providers are operating within the medical model of disability. So they are inherently looking at disability as something that needs to be fixed, as something that is wrong, that needs to be corrected. So when you are operating from that perspective, the healthcare system has just not cared to listen to the voices of individuals. Now, I will say this as somebody who is going into bioethics, there is hope. especially when considering like the trans and non-binary disparities within healthcare. We are starting to see more patient advocates, right? And that's one of my big things, is leaning into the role of the patient advocates. One, we don't want to put the burden to educate on the disabled individuals, because that puts them in a kind of a double bind where they're the patient, but then I have to also educate you. But that's burdensome. You know, you went to school as the medical professional, like you should know this. So unfortunately, there aren't like the best systems to educate. But right now we're working on trying to consider what kind of programs and how we can rethink like patient advocacy roles to educate providers and make them aware of how to, like, the medical model perpetuates ableism and the stigmatization of individuals with disabilities. And I hope that answers your question, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot here in Louisville where groups are educating medical professionals, but hopefully we'll see that change. Let's see. Have you done work with the Independence Seekers Project? I have not, but if you want to drop their link in the chat, I am all about connecting with community organizations. So, and then yes, please, please. Everybody, there is an organizing of a symposium on disability in Appalachia through UK, online and in person. There is a link, so if anybody is interested, I know I will be clicking on that. I actually just did a disability awareness campaign here at the University of Louisville, where actually Polly was one of my panelists, and we talked about disability, accessibility, and post-secondary education. So, yeah, we would love to keep doing disability justice work. Regina said there's a movement happening in healthcare to be patient center. Unfortunately, is slow. Yes, change takes time. The medical model is old. We have operated under this framework in medicine for a long, long time. And so in disability justice work, we are trying to switch from a medical model to a social model where access is what we're naming, and what we're recognizing is what we need. And then yes, thank you, Jabani. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about gender equity when it comes to the intersection of disability. I think it is very, very important to be mindful. Like Polly had said, sometimes we just aren't aware. We don't know that these things are happening, even if it's within our own population and our own community. Polly, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what Regina said, asking about the healthcare providers. One of the things I want to highlight as well is the lack of education with educators and teachers with disabilities, and that goes for physical disabilities and learning disabilities. I am personally dyslexic, so that is my learning disability, which is not a physical disability. You can't see it, but I struggle to learn. Like, it's really hard, but the lack of education, like a holistic side of disabilities, whether it's physical learning disabilities, whether it's like mental health disorders and stuff like that. There's such a lack of education within every aspect of, your everyday life, whether that's going to class or whether that is going to get a checkup at the doctor. It's just not researched enough. It's not taught enough, and it is extremely frustrating. I know, I'm sure you're in the same boat where you're extremely frustrated with the system because there's no resources, and like you said, there's no spaces for people to feel comfortable to go and be around people who are disabled. And I know you're at the Women's Center right now, which is something that I want to point out. Maybe if we had like a little, you said this, like a little area that we can all go and just feel community. That would help get representation like in our small little community at the University of Louisville. So the lack of education holistically is very frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. In my work in disability studies and advocacy, um, it truly has been an eye-opening experience. Being disabled, like my whole world is disability. Like I don't view the world through any other lens, because I've been disabled, my whole life. So for me, talking about disability is just like, oh, it's so normal. Why wouldn't you talk about it? But the reality is not everybody is disabled, and when you don't have that lived experience, some more often than not, we're just not really thinking about it. We're not thinking about how uh, systems impact, and we're not thinking about how the structures and what's perpetuating the disparities. Giovanni, I see that your hand is up.
I'm in deep gratitude. That's it. And I've been popping in and out, so I know I miss really great material. And so the content and the thing is, I'm grateful we're gonna put this on YouTube. In is What are just any quick takeaways in connecting disability justice to climate justice work that you see? And if
Yes.
I'm inappropriate in asking that question coming on the end, to call me out and I will look at the video.
No, you are appropriate in asking. So to tie in climate, and I actually was talking with Jimmy. I was like, I really want to do a whole thing on disability and climate justice. I think when it comes to climate emergencies like environmental disasters, uh, where individuals with disabilities meet at that intersection causes a lot of disparities for further access, right? If you're an individual with a disability who has experienced displacement due to some sort of climate crisis, everything that we talked about, the risks are increased, right? When you don't have shelter, but you're vulnerable, when you don't have access to food and you're vulnerable, right? And you have these disabilities and you're reliant and dependent on your community to support you in accessing things like food. I often think, as an avid like outdoor enthusiast and a lover of like community gardens and like homegrown food, how do we encourage individuals with disabilities who can't engage traditionally in growing their own food? Um, how are we supporting individuals with disabilities to reduce their carbon footprint when we have no other choice but to have a vehicle for transportation? And so I think problem solving, a lot of aspects of how does disability intersect with environment, because we cannot separate ourselves from the environment. As much as we like reach for the stars, even when we do go to outer space, we still take Earth with us because we're taking the materials of the Earth with us. So as much as we think, oh, we're gonna reach for the stars, we're gonna go out and leave this planet behind, like the reality is we are connected, we are interconnected, and we are dependent on this planet, and disabled people are no exception. And if we don't have systems that allow disabled people to become farmers, people to become food producers, for disabled people to become emergency responders, right? Because we have the capacity to be anything and everything that we want to be. So I think how we tie that into climate justice is recognizing that there is no intersection where you won't find disability, because we are absolutely everywhere. And when we lean into that, we 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 problem solve, and then we figure out how can we attain climate equity while also attaining disability equity. So hopefully that
Yes,
helps
yes.
tie it all into climate justice, and gender equity. So that is all that I have for you all today. Thank you so much for joining. Like I'm just So grateful that you all chose to come and listen to me ramble on about disability. It is the thing that I am passionate about. It's the thing that I will talk about until I am reincarnated into something new. And I'll probably still keep talking about it then. So, on that note, thank you everybody for your time and have a fantastic day. It's beautiful outside. If you get the chance, go soak up some vitamin D.
Thank you. It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you, everybody who was so vocal too. I appreciate all of the comments, all of the feedbacks, and I really hope that you took something away from this presentation today. So, and a huge shout out to all of you. Not raise my hand. I want to give you all a clap. There we go. All right, y'all. I'll see you back over at the main event.